Filter engaged? Okay, good. So it occurred to me that the state of mastering and mixing has fundamentally changed through the audio source separation systems. Because what I found out was no matter how many plugins there are, no matter how incredible and cool they are, that the best bang for your buck when it comes to remastering something is always getting the stems, as many stems as possible, but especially the critical stems. And so that's what the source audio separation stuff does. So therefore, if you had, let's say, a plugin or a DAW or something that had just, like spectral layers or something where you could have an interface, more than just a source separation or audio separation, you would have an interface that has plugins so that you could then further adjust the result. And I think actually Acorn Media, or is it Acon? Acon Media released a DAW that has the source splitting already inside of it, but the algorithm wasn't as good as some of the others I've heard, and it wasn't as up to date or as sophisticated. But the general idea is very good, which is so if you wanted to really do a better master of older files and you don't have access to the source material, the stems or the bounces or the alts or whatever, you can separate the material, and then you can level the material accordingly, and then you can EQ the desired amounts and places, and you can do your punches, and you can do all these things with the source separation. So what we're looking at is that it's all been very optimized, and we weren't made aware of it. And I'm not sure that they are even fully aware of like what they did to quantum leap the world of mastering. Because I was just thinking about that, like how long have people been looking for the ultimate mastering plugin or mixing plugin or all these things? But really, again, it comes down to having the balanced tracks first, and you have to have the vision of what you want the result to be, and then you can come in and do the additional processing. But without those layers, it's less quality. So no matter how much you change the transients, or no matter how much you saturate this and lower that and do all these things, if it's like a basic track, you're going to have issues. So that's why you want to have, and it's obvious, but it's even more interesting to think that they've actually optimized mastering very much by doing this, because we're talking about the old issues of like the bands where they would make a mix, and the mix is terrible, but the feeling is what they want. So even in cases like that, the engineer can just rip that master apart that they provided, and then using the source separation, the audio separation, they can come in and retweak those things and dub things where applicable. Because that's the other thing, is like the critical components of mastering and mixing is the space, the making even levels, knowing where you want the punch, and then applying the appropriate amount of compression or limiting or whatever you want, if you want that effect in the particular places. So, and then of course, when you do those things, you have to do additional steps that require the additional know-how and the additional processing and many other things I haven't discussed. But like another thing is like the thing with rolling off lows and all this kinds of stuff. That's something that's done to make space. But I can actually hear, like when I listen to different environments, like people who use that too excessively, and the song loses its actual like main purpose and main drive. So if you do a lot of roll off on like kicks and stuff like that, if on the right system it's going to sound incredible, but on other various systems it might not translate as well. So that's kind of another thing, because that's another thing that I'm realizing with mixing and mastering, because I never stop pondering this stuff and trying to do things and trying to come up with the latest possible state-of-the-art way to do things. But it occurred to me that it's really about, so you have density and you have resonance, but you also have this thing that exists within a track of like where you're dubbing. And so you could have a bass, but the bass is actually 3 or 4 different parts. And if you want to produce that way to make material that's really cast iron, where it's always going to sound a certain way, that might be something to consider, a way to go. Because what you do is there's one thing where you're capturing sound from a speaker, and that's creating a very cemented impression, so that sound will always sound like that. Somehow there's some kind of thing that happens when you record from a speaker, and that's why I think a lot of the hip hop and the sampled music, where they would sample not just from a record but from the actual speaker, and I think that's why it always sounds the way it does, no matter what system you play it on, like the kicks and the claps and the snares and all that, because of that additional layer of capture, this hidden resonance that exists within the speaker to further impose an impression. But anyways, it just kind of occurred to me that if you really wanted the best translatable mix, not only does it have to be clean and well manicured and modulated, but it also benefits from the extra layers of dub. So if you have a piano, it would be good to have 2 or 3 pianos that are the shadow of the instrument. So long ago I created this thing called groove shadow. And so what happens is the groove shadow is one thing for certain things, but there's another thing for other things. The groove shadow actually helps to refine, not just support what you hear. And through dub, that actually occurs. So that's where we get to this thing of having not just one snare, but 3 or 4 snares. Or the bass, like I was saying, like 3 basses, because the bass is one of the trickiest ones, because getting that level perfect and the resonance within the bass perfect and the audibility of each of those tracks to where it's going to engage on some systems, but it's not going to engage on others. But in every system you listen to, you'll be able to hear through those groove shadows, the shadow tracks, the actual intention of the bass. So that's why certain basses, I think, especially electronic basses, they produce a more audible tone by default, because they weren't just going after, capturing a live player. They were sort of mimicking qualities of a bass, but they accidentally added too much mid and low mid. But by doing that, because they were synthesizers, and by doing that, they actually created a better, more audible bass. Now, it's not better in the sense that the musician is better because he's, because it's a synthesizer, but it's better in the sense that it's really always going to translate pretty well from your phone. We're talking about just from like a small speaker to a large speaker translation. Now, we get into the surround stuff, and that's a whole other ballgame. But, on the common systems, you have your phone and you have a hi-fi. And so you have a phone and you have your hi-fi in your car. These are the common systems, and you have your phone, and you have the audio that comes out of the ceiling, the mood music and stuff like that. So like they're always, the main one is like the orbit is around the phone these days, unfortunately, and they haven't developed the stereo cell yet, where the phone actually has decent speakers or a way to simply plug in the phone into a frame and then have it turn into a stereo. I mean, that just goes to show how they ignore the obvious that's right in front of them, because they're not being paid to develop things for that. And there's a void in that market, and they just don't even care, or they take so long to do things that it's going to come in some great new package, but it won't come right away. But anyways, I digress from the notion of the topic here. The point of the topic is that the ways that we master and mix these days has fundamentally improved, even with basic understanding of the simple layers of mixing. And even with the more sophisticated tools that we have, we don't necessarily need those, because all we really need to be able to do quickly is to pull out the stems, from the source material, and then mix those stems, master those stems, run those stems through processes like summing systems and saturation systems. And essentially, you're hardening the cast of that tone, and you're also leveling the tone to the desired, either level in the track or just a level in general to make it even. And so those are the essential points. And so if you think about it, like how incredibly quick that would make the mastering process, if you know what to focus on. If you know what to focus on, because what happens in the modern era is there's a billion ways to do so many amazing, incredible, cool, very intricate things, but the novelty of tricky sounds is really wears thin very quickly. So you go through all this great effort to do something tricky, but it's like it's like the effect of doing something complex, the mind goes numb to it over time. So there's less appreciation, even though you're still putting all this incredible, engineering into the material. And of course, the ways that they utilize the engineering of the sounds and the different leads these days has totally changed. But we're just talking about like general mastering and mixing using the source audio component. So think about a system like spectral layers. That could be a DAW, especially if they start to implement more grid-based, BPM-based tools. And so, but it's hard for people to get their head around just what it does at the moment, and because it's a very sophisticated tool. And so it really, they talk about how you changed the paradigm. Well, it really did, but it also could be a very simple way, like there could be a spectral layers mastering tool. So like how Ozone did that. In fact, that's what they have a plugin. Was it RX7? I don't think it's RX7. One of their tools is like the whole thing is similar to what I'm talking about, but it's not quite a DAW, and it's not quite for mastering. So it's for like restoration and things like that. But you could definitely do similar things in that system already, and that just goes to show like how far we've come, how far they've come to develop such incredible things. And you can see that it already exists where, the new generation is not going to have to worry about these sophisticated aspects of mastering, because as long as you know, again, what to look out for, it's almost like these systems, if they do these things, they should let people know, hey, how to use this explicitly for mixing and mastering, and maybe with some guides and some pointers for these people, the new kids and the older kids who are trying to really recalibrate their vision of what occurs in this technological sphere. But like for instance, that's how I reappropriate things and I repurpose things. I start to realize that you can use those tools for very specific things aside from the advanced things that they provide. So anyways, just a thought on that, a long thought on that.